Georgia feels like they've got a score to settle with the Gators. That's what former Florida standout wide receiver Chris Doering said on the SEC network during the SEC's reveal of the 2021 schedule. Well, I think that's probably pretty close to being right. This past season was such a strange time, and for Florida to have such a good year. At some stage they were going to win the East. I think I've been saying that for some time with Matt DeBerry on our website, dogpost.com. But when you say they've got a score to settle, you can take that any number of ways. You don't want to make too much of it, but they certainly are ready to beat Florida's brains in this year. Dan Mullen is a guy that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, and he's his constant poking at Georgia, a program that he had not beaten until this year, is something that really aggravated a lot of folks in Athens. And then to get up 14-0 and fall apart in Jacksonville for a couple of different reasons, Georgia really did not play its best game. And Florida played well. I mean, I think, Florida deserved to win that game for sure, all of that stuff. Kirby Smart is still pissed off about the way his defense played that night, and he should be. I mean, it was a total failure on their part. Now, listen, the Florida guys made plays. When you sit there and look back at the game, this was a game that Florida played well. This was not the way they played against Vanderbilt or Kentucky in the weeks following that. Certainly not the way they played against LSU. This was similar to the way they played against Alabama. So this was a Florida team that got it all together that day, and they deserve credit for that. That's how this works. But when Doering says they got a score to settle, really Georgia's got their own issues with that game they got to deal with, independent of Florida. When you listen to Kirby Smart talk about his aggravation about that game, it's still weeks later, in some cases a couple of months after that game, and he's still talking about how bad the defense played. So that really they've got no one to blame but themselves for that performance. But that's a long time ago now in the grand scheme of things. You're talking about coming on 4 months ago and a game that will be in Jacksonville in about 9 months or so. So this is a Georgia game with the Gators that will almost certainly decide the East. That's how this goes. This is what we do. With the exception of very few games in this century has a game other than this game decided who goes to play for the SEC championship. And Florida has not won the SEC in the last decade, but Georgia has. Still, the two schools have dominated going to the championship, and this game determines who goes. I mean, the loser of this game has not gone to play for the SEC championship since 2005. So you got to win this game. And if you don't, it's not going to happen. In 2002, 2003, 2005, the loser of this game went on to play for the SEC championship. Well, all three of those games were upsets. And it shouldn't have happened. But, what happened in 2020 should have happened. I mean, Florida at the time was the better team than Georgia. You play that game later in the year, is it a different outcome? That's not the point. The point is you got to play it when it's there. So, if there's a score to settle, Georgia really needs to come into the game with Florida. I mean, they're going to be, it's hard for me to see right now where they would not be favored going into that game. The Gators lose so many players that were really good players. Tony, the wide receiver. You have, quarterback, tight end, wide receivers are gone. And, you're starting over in many ways for Florida on the offensive side of the ball. You can't say that for Georgia. Barring injury, they're going to have their top thrower, top two runners, all of their top runners, all of their top receivers. It's all going to be back for Georgia. The defense will be different, but we've seen transition for Georgia at defense. So this is going to be a game when you start talking about settling scores. Georgia and Florida is one of the classics of college football. No, very few people have games like this. Oklahoma, Texas, and if you want to say Army, Navy, okay. But this game has been played for more than 100 years in these two schools, and it's been in Jacksonville the bulk of that time. It is one of the quintessential games in college football, nevertheless the SEC. And that both teams have been in the top 10 these last few years when they've played shows the importance of the game. I mean, you don't get that in a lot of rivalries. Rivalries just happen. Auburn, Alabama is usually not a top 10 matchup. Most rivalries are not top 10 matchups typically. When was the last time Florida State was top 10 matchup? So these two teams have become very good programs. Georgia's a better program than the Gators. The Gators had a better team last year. There's a difference. And so is that what Doering's talking about? Can he see the writing on the wall that this is going to be a very different Florida team? That the Gators have some adjustment to do. I mean, who's going to be the quarterback? Emory Jones, I guess. Not a lot of experience there. Is he going to play well? Who's going to be the running back? Is it going to be the kid from Bainbridge? Is it, what's going on with this offensive line that was not great and then became very good and functional for the Gators along the season? They've got a score to settle. Georgia has had their way with the Gators lately. When you start talking about, 17, 18, 19, those two of those three wins were double-digit wins. I mean, one was an absolute blowout. So, Florida winning that game in 2020 was Dan Mullen had to have that win. The 2019 game was the game that all the Florida fans were pointing to, saying, hey, this is where we take this thing back over. And it didn't happen. And so there was a lot of cause for concern there. But now with the bizarre nature of the ending of Florida's season and how much Georgia's, returning, it is going to be something to see. If Georgia can't take them out this year, something's happened along the way. And there's not a lot of times, the people who grew up in the 80s and 90s, particularly in the 90s, there's very few times people have said that coming into a season. But that's the case this year. Georgia should handle their business against Florida. The difference between Kirby Smart's program and Dan Mullen's program, those are pretty different. The teams last year, Florida had the better team. They should have won, and they did. Dean Legge from Dog Post, making you a smarter Georgia fan. Make sure you're checking out our playlist up here. We're going to get you ready for the 2021 season. It's right around the corner. It will be here before you know it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the website.